Welcome, everyone. My name is Lisa Norberg. I'm the Dean of the Barnard College Library and Information Services, and I'm delighted to be here today to introduce the fifth of 6 events in the Research Without Borders series for the 2010-11 academic year, sponsored by the Scholarly Communications Program. I'll introduce our speakers today. Each will speak for about 20 minutes. And then we'll have time for discussion and questions from the audience. We are videotaping the event, so if you have a question for our panel, we ask that you use the microphone in the middle of the room. It is my great pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Charles Watkinson is Director of Purdue University Press, a unit of Purdue University Libraries. He previously worked as Director of Publications at the American School of Classical Studies. He has over 15 years of experience in various scholarly publishing roles and is a member of the Executive Board of the Society for Scholarly Publishing and of the Library Relations Committee of the Association of American University Presses. He is currently working on an IMLS-funded research project on strategies for success in library-based publishing. Monica McCormick is Program Officer for Digital Scholarly Publishing and leads the Office for Digital Scholarly Publishing at New York University. She reports jointly to the Division of Libraries and to NYU Press. She worked for more than 15 years at the University of California Press, mainly as an acquiring editor in the humanities. She received her MSLS in 2006. She hopes to find ways to unite the distinct but compatible skills of publishers and those of librarians and technologists to support sustainable scholarly communication. Oddly enough, her bio fails to mention a certain information services course she took in the fall of 2005, which I believe was life-altering for Monica, but I guess you can't include everything. Maria Bonn is the Associate University Librarian for Publishing at the University of Michigan Library. Her position was created to oversee the library's growing suite of publishing and scholarly communication initiatives, which include the University of Michigan Press and the Scholarly Publishing Office. She serves as an advisor to the university community on issues surrounding scholarly publishing and communication policy, and supports innovative projects in those areas, both in and out of the library. Please help me welcome our panel.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa, and it's a real pleasure and an honor to be here from the wilds of the Midwest, where the snow melted yesterday. It's very nice to have this opportunity to talk about campus-based publishing. And I'm going to talk about a few things. I'm going to start with a few words about the wider context of library-based publishing, move on to what we're doing at Purdue, and then I have 3 sort of case studies, which I hope illustrate some of the points I'm going to make. So I'd first like to give a little bit of context that comes from some work we're doing with colleagues at University of Utah and Georgia Tech with the support of IMLS. And this is a collaborative planning grant under the National Leadership Grant Scheme with the name Library Publishing Services Strategies for Success. And as you may know, the collaborative planning grants are preparatory, they're meant to be informing directions for the future. So the aim of this particular project is to take stock of what's going on in library-based publishing about 3 years after several important reports, many of which you'll know, particularly the report by Callahan for ARL on research library publishing, and to really take an evidence-based approach to the next phase of capacity building in this area. It's an activity that has several stages. The first one was a web survey, which we started in October last year and finished off at the end of the year. And many of the people in this room were very, very helpful in completing this horrible survey, which took about an hour, although we pretended it took 20 minutes. And so we're very grateful for that. We surveyed members of ARL, all ARL institutions, Oberlin Group institutions, and University Library Group institutions. University Library Group, of course, is sort of a number of private institutions, mid-sized libraries. ARL, the largest, and Oberlin Group was meant to represent a lot of the smaller institutions. So what we are trying to do there is get a good sample of different types of library. We also are doing 3 case studies, one at each member institution, and those are being done by Raim Crow, who many of you will know, who is a consultant at Spark, as well as a business consultant for many projects in scholarly publishing. And he has been to Purdue, he has focused at Purdue on e-journals and sustainability and business modeling in the e-journal space. He's in Atlanta this week at Georgia Tech looking at conference proceedings and publishing that kind of symposium and proceedings product. And then he finishes off in Utah looking at book-like publications. So that includes technical reports as well as monographs. And then finally, in May, we'll be holding 3 workshops, one at each member institution. And those are to bring together the people who completed the survey the best, but also people who we've learned about through the whole research process, who we feel have interesting things to say. But the other thing about those is that we're trying to get a good sample of different types of libraries and different types of roles within those libraries. So people who haven't been invited are not interesting people. It's just that we're trying to get that sample. And there's a URL where you can find out more about this, and we're going to be putting up the list of speakers at those workshops quite soon at the Spark Partnering website. So these are some very initial results from that web survey which we completed. And you'll see at the top sort of the headline figure which Carla Hahn came up with, which caused a bit of a stir back in 2008. Which was that 65% of ARL institutions were either doing or considering publishing. And that figure has come up again and again in various reports. In the web survey that we've done, we had around the same number of ARL institutions answering, and it looks as if it's now about 78% of ARL institutions are either doing or considering publishing. So there is some growth, and only 22% of the institutions were not active at all in this area. It's a difficult number because publishing is a very broad term, but it's interesting to see growth. As I mentioned, we were also looking at what was happening in the smaller institutions. And you'll see that of the Oberlin Group members, so mostly liberal arts colleges, only 28% are active in this area. And across all the groups, 56% said they were active, but if one assumes that the people who didn't respond really didn't have publishing programs, then that's even a smaller amount, 37%. But they may just have got sick of our long surveys, so we're not sure about that. This is just another sort of, another feature of the survey. We asked the respondents to explain why they'd started or why they were considering publishing services, and to check all that apply with a pre-selected list. And I think what's interesting here is to show that this is not just a mission-related activity for libraries to change the established scholarly publishing system, but there's also definite demand on campuses that they're responding to from faculty, students, and administration. And then the 21% cited other, if overlapping, reasons. This was just a free text field. Just a couple of other things, since we're talking today partly about collaboration. 32% of ARL libraries are participating in a collaborative project with the University Press. And we asked what kind of project that might be. And most of those projects are digitizing out-of-print monographs. And this is interesting to me because Carlahan found 31% of ARL libraries back in 2007 doing collaboration. So this really, it strikes me that this has not really grown as an activity. And I think the University Press community may be partly responsible for that and resistant to it. And then finally, there was, back in 2007, this report from Ithaca, University Publishing in a Digital Age. Only 11% of university press directors reported to deans of libraries. Most reported up to the provost. And that's grown slightly. 17% of university press directors now report to the heads of libraries. So just in that context, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the organizational situation at Purdue University. These are just some facts and figures about Purdue in the middle of a field. A land-grant institution, it is a public institution. I want to just point out particularly the fact that this is a very focused university. It does have humanities and social sciences, but it's really a land-grant institution focusing on science, technology, agriculture and engineering, and areas like aeronautical engineering in particular. The University Press is part of the libraries, and it's had a reporting relationship for many years, but this really became a much more focused relationship in 2009, when the press was moved physically from the margins of campus next to the public relations and the information people, right into the heart of the libraries. So it's moved to a space which is just above library administration, next to the information technology department, very close to everything that's going on around scholarly communication. And that was a decision made by the Dean, Jim Mullins. But it came into the libraries as a pretty traditional press, very book-focused, 25 to 30 books a year, very small. It's an AAUP Group 1 press, under 1.5 million in net sales, which is characteristic of 50% of AAUP presses, over 50%. And it had one odd feature, which is that since 2006, the press had started publishing open access journals using the library's Digital Commons platform. And so now we have 10 open access journals, small journals, mostly faculty founded, but they do quite well. And the last point here, non-aligned strengths. Purdue actually does have strengths in these areas, in Jewish studies and Central European history and so on, but you'll see that that's really not aligned with where the university focuses its attention and its funding, which is on areas of science and technology and engineering and agriculture. And that's a point I'm going to continue with. So this is just the web page of the press, and you'll see the Jewish Jesus, Hugo von Hofmannsthal, from Burke and Wordsworth to the modern sublime in Chinese literature. So just to reinforce the point that these are not what you would expect to see from a large STEM-based university. So the part of the libraries where there's most collaboration, most opportunity for collaboration with the press is in the area of repository services. There was this idea of e-scholar being the university's library's repository service umbrella, split down into e-pubs, e-archives, and e-data. That was a good idea. It's not necessarily been carried through. And I'm going to focus on e-pubs, which is what's run on Digital Commons. E-archives is still run on Content DM. And e-data is really a work in progress, although we're finally making some good headway there on the data side. ePubs is staffed by one FTE, the Digital Collections Librarian, Mark Newton. And with Digital Commons, we're able, of course, to outsource the technical activities of running that platform to Berkeley Electronic Press. EdiKit makes it quite a powerful publishing service as well, and I think that's a great advantage of Digital Commons, that you have the same workflow tools as BE Press uses for their own journals. And here's a picture of ePubs, and you'll see the Purdue University Press has a community there, and in there you'll find these 10 e-journals, you'll find some backlist monographs, open access, and you will find a couple of other things, but quite a small community. So here in 2008 was the problem, and this is what I'm going to devote the remainder of my minutes to. So for the press, our problem was that the lists were not aligned with the university's strengths. As a very small press, there's a lack of digital expertise and capacity to respond to the growing interest that faculty were showing in things digital, grown interest by 2008. And basically, the press was pretty irrelevant to most of the institution. It was not well known about. For the libraries, and for Purdue EPUBs in particular, there was this problem that all repositories, or most repositories, were having back then of lack of faculty participation as depositors. There was nothing in it for the faculty in terms of what they get out of depositing. Just Mark sitting there trying to provide services and not really able to provide services even though he's being asked for them. So he could provide the infrastructure, but not really the services to support that. So faculty would have to do a lot themselves. And some difficulty in articulating what the repository was for, which I think was common back then, and possibly still is in some cases. So this is a slide that I found very useful as a sort of a thinking tool for thinking about how the press and the libraries can collaborate, and particularly EPUBs. It's a slide that started with J.G. Banke, who's the CEO of BE Press. And what it shows is it shows this continuum of faculty needs, faculty and staff needs in the digital environment for all kinds of things, not just books and journals, but all kinds of different products. The blue stars are areas where perhaps the Purdue EPUBs and the libraries have the skills and can provide the best services. The red stars are areas where the press can potentially add value. And in many cases, a blue star is overlain with a red star. So, for example, if you think of a conference, you can see an electronic presentation of that conference hosted by the libraries, and then a more digested form of the conference in maybe an edited book done by the press. So I like this. I like this slide as a way of showing that we operate across a continuum, and by doing things together, we can provide more in that continuum than each operating independently. And I'd like to now just talk about 3 case studies very briefly. These are areas of importance to the university which the press was previously not operating in, which we are now able to operate in and provide some services to the faculty in. And these are areas of importance. And I call this slide From Collaboration to Integration because, as I'll show, we started in a small way and then we've moved on to things which are much more integrated and where it's hard to say which part is the press and which part is the libraries. The 2 entities are bringing skills to the table, but it's a joint project. Civil engineering, building construction, very strong areas at Purdue. And what we started doing with the libraries is we were doing books at the press in sort of niche areas, mainly with building construction management, which is the #1 department in the country. There aren't that many departments, but it is a very good department. And what we were doing was we were putting supplementary materials on EPUBs. And here you see some spreadsheets which are printed in the demolition book, but you can download them and you can manipulate them and use them from EPUBs. But now, so this is the collaboration, now we're moving to work much more closely, and this is a project, the JTRP, Joint Transportation Research Program, funded by the Indiana Department of Transportation, based at Purdue. It's been active since the 1930s. And we're now working with JTRP to do things which are library-like, but also things which are publishing-like with their digital, with their technical reports. So you can see a list of things, and lib, there's a library role, and press, there's a publishing role. Being able to bundle together all these services, we can provide what this group needs. And you'll see a sample report up there, citizen band radio communication. So this is just some guys sitting in a car by the edge of I-65 and being monitored by the JTRP, who are then transcribing their activities. And you'll see Digital Commons has a little widget so you can plot it on a Google map and so on. So here's something where Indiana, INDOT through JTRP is providing funding for a 0.5 FTE production editor within the press, and also providing funding for some digitization work by the libraries. And we think it's an interesting project. Here's another area where the press has had a very strong list. This is the relationship between pets and people, but that continues into areas of therapy dogs and public policy. There's a slide which I didn't put up, which is about the New York poop scoop law, for example. We have a book on that. And you can see here the collaboration with the libraries was limited to putting some older books up, open access in digital commons, so the ecology of stray dogs. But now in this area, we're moving towards a much more integrated approach, which is a project which I'm very excited by, which is being called HABRI Central, Human Animal Bond Research Initiative Central. And this is hopefully launching later this year, well, launched in 2012. And it's part bibliography, it's part of sort of a digital library, and of course we're inspired here by things like Columbia International Affairs Online and the long civil rights movement work at UNC. But it's got parts in here, library staff time being funded by this foundation-supported project. So you'll see in year one, actually no, these are continuing. In year one, there's actually more of a librarian to do the bibliography. There's a taxonomy for the field, repository, and so on. So here's another project where the library and the press can bring much more to the table. And the press's skills in project management and in original publishing are brought in through the journal and the coordination role. And finally, information literacy is a big issue at Purdue, and it's not just a library thing, it's something that the provost believes very strongly in. The last provost said, you know, plagiarism is the biggest problem facing this university. So this is a situation where we've been working to produce a journal of Purdue undergraduate research, and I'm just indicating with the red arrows that librarians are very involved with this editorial board, but also in terms of working with the student authors, producing training materials, using this as a learning opportunity in the area of publication ethics. So again, this is a funded model for the first 3 years, and then hopefully, touch wood, it will be picked up by the university and adopted as a core thing. And we have we believe that's going to happen. So just to conclude, you know, this all looks very rosy, but we're definitely, as we grow this project, we're running into some issues, and these are some things we're thinking about. The brand and reputation issue, from the point of view of the press, are we betraying the university press heritage by doing things like undergraduate research journals and putting our name on them? Are we are we wrong to put our name on technical reports? And that's a tricky one, because we could go over to a sort of a white label approach and just say, okay, we're going to provide the services, but we're not going to put our name on them. But then we, again, risk becoming irrelevant. So it's a difficult one, and I think there is probably a similar concern about some of the branding of the libraries in an area where the libraries are being sort of explicitly commercial. But this comes over to the question of business and sustainability models, and the issue of when should we charge, when should we say this is mission related? And I think this is an area which will come up again and again today. How much of this is mission related, how much of this is cost recovery? I think what we hope will happen is that we can move towards a product mix where some things will be subsidizing other things. But at the moment, we're operating a lot of this on short-term money. And that really brings up this issue of when the initial funding comes along, what will happen in terms of these projects, especially with a complex project like HABRI Central. Will the library be carrying an unfunded project and have to deal with it? And lastly, how do we define the limits of our service? Are we just talking about materials for faculty at Purdue, or are we actually providing larger services to a larger community. And this is an area I think we're all facing as societies come to us looking for publication solutions. And I think many of you will know about the ARL project, looking at the Journals Rescue Project, as it's known, looking at how ARL libraries might support print journals that want to transition to online. So, what do we do with these society journals? Are they within our remit or not? How do we prevent scope creep? So that's it. Thank you very much.
So as my former professor Lisa pointed out, I have both a publishing background and a library degree, and so this project is really, or this presentation is really forcing me to think through how those two things have come together in my work life in the last few years at NYU. So I'm going to talk about what the way we've organized digital publishing at NYU and how we're managing certain kinds of projects and different efforts coming from both the libraries and the press, and where we hope that we're going. The context at NYU, as most of you know, is it's according to our website, the largest private university in the country. We have 52,000 students, campuses now all over the world, and that's going to continue. A very large ARL library with a pretty significant collections budget. But our press is rather small. We're bigger than the Purdue Press. We have 25 FTE at the press. Publish about 100 books a year. We don't do any journals. NYU Press has never published journals, so we don't have that expertise, which for a lot of places brings a lot of digital expertise in with the journal publishing. We're really strictly a book press. And one of the things that I've discovered since I took over this position is that in addition to working with the libraries and the press, there's also really the necessity of working with ITS. So ITS is part of our structure for how we're providing digital publishing services. And one of the big pieces of context for the way we're able to do digital publishing is the sort of new tagline for NYU, that we are a global network university. We have established a campus in Abu Dhabi. We're establishing a second one in Shanghai, and these are not just study abroad programs. These are intended to be fully fledged, real NYU educations happening around the world. So there's an enormous effort underway to figure out how to provide research and teaching and support all that globally, not only from NYU, but not only from New York, but beyond. So my position in the Office of Digital Scholarly Publishing was created, I've been there about 3.5 years now, not quite 3.5 years, and it was explicitly intended to be a link between the library and the press. So I have an office in both places. I report to the dean of the library and to the director of the press, and I spend an enormous amount of time doing networking with ITS colleagues as well as faculty and others at the university who are really the people that are bringing us a lot of the content that we want to publish. So I thought I'd try to give you a sample of how our organization looks, and this is a very schematic description of it, but it gives you some sense of sort of how we're operating and how the human relationships work. So I am the little ODSP, Office of Digital Scholarly Publishing, at the bottom, and I report to the press and I report to the library, and the press also reports to the library. And then because we need technology support that does not exist in the press really doesn't have the technology resources, we rely on DLTS, the Digital Library Technology Services, which is part of the library, that has a dotted line report to ITS, which is the department of ITS is .edu services that manages everything from Blackboard to email to all kinds of strategic technology services. So there's a person in each of these places who's talking to all the other people at each of these places, and EDU services also has a dotted line report to the library. So what this structure suggests is, in some ways, that there's a lot of sort of separate organizations each with their own missions and goals and priorities, but that the human relations among them are what's really kind of keeping this going. And as the one person who's really trying to link all these conversations, I think that's one of the things that makes our organization really unusual, is that I am the one person tasked with making sure these conversations continue. I have a lot of help with that, and the people that I'm talking to are certainly not averse to it, but it's my job to sort of drive that bus, and that has its challenges. And partly because I can't know enough about what all those other organizations are doing, and neither can they know enough about what everybody else is doing. So one of the responsibilities I've realized is that in addition to my communicating, I need to make sure that we have more structure in place for everyone else to communicate, and that is making a real difference as we start to build in that structure. But as we created the position, we determined that essentially it was going to sort of fall into three kind of main categories of work. So one is that I'll be providing and figuring out ways to provide library publishing services just from within the library. And I'll be working just within the press to help the press think strategically about how to evolve from a book print publisher into a publisher of scholarship and rely on other technology services to do that. And then finally, the third piece is to bring the resources of the press and the library together in some ways that they haven't done before. So the priorities at the library were really just to bring some publishing expertise into the organization. Nobody in the library had any specific experience with publishing, and that was one of the reasons they wrote the job description. We're looking for someone with both an MLS and a publishing background. And then they wanted to really start providing publishing services, so we've essentially, in the same ways, some of the ways that Purdue has done, we focus those in part on our repositories and some journal publishing services. So we have a DSpace repository, the Faculty Digital Archive, and that has been, as Charles suggested, it's a challenge to get people to contribute their own work to it. So what I've been focusing on, our emphasis is really to make it a resource for both individual faculty members, but also departments and centers and institutes that have material that's difficult to publish in other ways. So really, instead of looking at getting faculty to give us copies of their already published articles, what I'm looking for are working papers and some conference proceedings and various kinds of gray literature, research reports, things that need to be disseminated, need to be stored, that are sort of scattered on websites around the campus now, but that could be more effectively made available in our archive. So that's the goal, and we're working at that with a number of different colleges and groups around the campus. We're also just in the process of starting to offer a service of journal publishing using the open source software Open Journal Systems, which I know is used here at Columbia as well. And our first journal is coming out of the School of Education at Steinhardt. So those are two things that I manage. There are technology people who are both in the library and in ITS to support them. And one of the challenges has been how, because we don't have digital commons, we don't have a vendor off-site who can manage the technology issues. We're trying to figure out how do we upgrade those services, how do we create the technology that we need using open source software and provide the adequate support. So that's been a real open, ongoing conversation. From within the press, one of the things that was clear at the outset was that we weren't going to suddenly drop our business model and stop publishing books. We really needed to continue to sustain the business. And I think one advantage of my position is that although I report to both the press and the library, I am on the, in the personnel world, my salary is paid out of the library budget. I don't cost the press anything. So on some level, I am available to them. I sort of expand their bandwidth to think creatively and to start strategically planning how they're going to move into the future without needing to cover my costs. And I think that's made a big difference in just sort of opening up that conversation. As at Purdue, we have a press that publishes a very specific set of lists because for good business reasons, you publish what you're good at and you publish what you're known for and what your strengths are in. And at NYU, that's in the humanities and the social sciences in about 10 different fields. And some of them are strengths at NYU in history and media studies, cultural studies, law, and sociology. But NYU is an enormous comprehensive research university, and we couldn't possibly publish in every field that's important to NYU. So that has led over the years to a lot of frustration, and I don't believe the press is considered irrelevant at the university, but there's a lot of mystification about why we would turn down things that so clearly are about NYU. Why wouldn't we publish a history of the physics department, for example? There are a lot of good reasons why you wouldn't do that, but you have to have that conversation over and over and over. So part of the reason for my position was to build those, start to be able to provide publishing consultation and advice that comes in some ways from the press, but doesn't require the press to kind of come to the table as a publisher in all ways. The other thing that we wanted to do is really be able to take advantage of new opportunities and think through how to do that. So vendors and technologies coming on stream pretty much weekly, we have to figure out how to decide among those. So part of my work is talking with the managers at the press about how we set our priorities and how we go about doing that. Because ultimately our goal is to be a scholarly publisher regardless of format. We want to evolve into that where we may be a book publisher, but we may be supporting all kinds of other things as well. And that's, if we want to head that way, what do we need to do to get there? As I said, one of our major partners is the department in the library, the Digital Library Technology Services. And some background is useful here because when I arrived at NYU, they were just in the beginning of a process of evolution from being essentially a project-based, grant-funded, they would get money to do a specific project and build technology as they needed it, and they were really trying to expand their tool set and their skill set, but it was really focused on what they could get money for. And slowly they've been able to provide more ongoing funding and full-time staff that weren't just grant funded and have evolved into a real operation that wasn't, their primary focus when I arrived was really some very significant preservation efforts and digital preservation of formats that are important at NYU in audio and video, television. So they had some great expertise in preservation, but they hadn't done large-scale digitization in any way. They hadn't done a lot of, we weren't digitizing our own collections, and they weren't really offering a whole lot of ongoing access to stuff. They would build a website, but it wasn't really considered a publication in the sense of how were people going to use and reuse that material. So these are the departments that are on the slide that they've now assembled themselves into, and it gives a lot more opportunity for us to think about how are we going to combine efforts and what can we do working with them to figure out how to bring projects in that the DLTS can help us build. So I'll give, as Charles did, a few examples of specific things that we're working on. And I tried to sort of encapsulate what they are. And in some ways, I think we're trying to find ways to bring traditional scholars into the digital realm. We're also trying to work really closely with innovative scholars who are very, very eager and pushing us to do more in the digital realm. And then also really focusing on who the publishing partners are at NYU that we can work with most effectively, both from the press and the library side. So the first example we did was, this came directly out of the press. An editor had a book that was based on texts written by authors who were representing detainees at Guantanamo. And they were writing a book about it, but they wanted to provide access to the full texts of just in PDF form. So this seemed like an obvious thing to do. So the press published the book, and the library built a website. And then it turned out that the authors of the book had an enormous additional archives in print and in digital form of all kinds of other materials related to work at Guantanamo, and they wanted to make that available. So that is an ongoing project in the library's special collections, and so this evolved nicely from a good way to help an editor acquire a book that the authors wanted something more than just a book, so we were able to offer that. And then the library also gained a very large and what we expect to be a growing special collection over time. So that was just sort of a nice indicator at the beginning, first year, that this sort of having somebody in between the press and the library was going to turn out to be useful for a variety of reasons. There's one of the things that's been important for us to bear in mind is how our university's own large context can influence what we're doing, and the press has worked for a long time to really remind people at the university that we are available to do publishing. So one of the exciting things that's happened with our new campus in Abu Dhabi is a large number of research grants have been given, and several of them have explicitly listed the press as the publisher of the works that are going to be produced in that research. So this is the first one that's coming underway. It's the Library of Arabic Literature, which will be a $3.75 million grant over 5 years to translate classical Arabic literature into English and publish them in facing page translations the way the Loeb classical editions are published, or at NYU we did this with the Clay Sanskrit Library a few years ago. But we're also going to have an online edition, and we're still discussing in what form that will take. So we're talking about, in some ways, very, very, I mean, there's sort of nothing more sort of traditional to me than a literature scholar very carefully translating the texts of these, in some ways, incredibly arcane works. This is one of those examples of when you realize you don't know anything when you start talking about what Arabic literature is. It's fascinating and incredibly diverse. So we're really trying to think about how are we going to make that available online, who's the audience and the market for it. The library's also gotten some money to scan works that we have in Arabic in our library, and we're working with several other libraries in the region, so we'll be able to provide a library of those scanned texts. But then in addition to that, we want the scholars who are working at these translations to have the opportunity to work together in some effective ways and to collaborate. So the Global Technology Services Group at NYU, which is building tools to help support our global research university, is we've been talking to them about possibly using these scholars who are scattered all over the world as a test case for how we can link people together as they're working and doing their translations and coming up with agreed upon translations for certain terms and other ways that will support their work together. So they aren't people, these are not scholars who are reaching out to us and saying, hey, we want to do something really super groovy. They want to translate Arabic, but we want to give them tools and use them as test cases to help us figure out how to provide other kinds of groovy services. Media Commons is a group that we've been working with both from the press and the library side, who really constitute the initiators of all kinds of ideas. These are a group of scholars who are in media studies. Not all of them are at NYU, and initially we took this over without them being at NYU. One of them was expecting to publish a book with NYU Press. So this was kind of an unusual library reaching out to support scholarship that wasn't really explicitly coming out of NYU. It's a network of scholars who are working in a variety of different forms, and we've built them a website, and essentially they're providing different kinds of publishing and new forms of scholarship and new genres, and asking for tools that will help support that. So just across the top there, I can describe these very briefly. In Media Race is a weekly sort of thematic, in some ways like a weekly magazine that allows scholars to post a video clip and describe it, annotate it, discuss it, and then there's a conversation that takes place. And that's essentially using simple blog software. You can put multimedia up and you can allow conversation, but they curate it in such a way that every week has a different theme, and then people are able to respond very quickly to changes in the news, because putting these things online doesn't take any significant amount of work, and it doesn't go through a peer review process. But then the different sets of discussions can be used and have been used in classes, and in various ways people come back to them and the conversations can continue. The new Every Day is a related set of scholarly conversations. They form clusters, and what they're calling it is a middle state publishing, or it's not a blog and it's not quite an article. It's the sort of people are starting to think hard about a topic and they want to discuss it with each other. So Media Commons platform allows them to create a cluster of conversations around these particular topics and then have lots of interactive conversation about those. Finally, the Media Commons Press is a platform that enables essentially open online peer review. So books or journals or edited collections can be posted in this software called Comment Press, and people can comment on it, on whatever, anyone who's online can join this conversation, and they can comment on it paragraph by paragraph. So the one example we had of this was a book that had been submitted to NYU Press for publication was simultaneously posted in Media Commons Press. And so the author was getting traditional formal peer review done at the press at the same time as she was getting open online peer review done by folks on this site. and was able to really benefit from those two different forms of interaction. The goal that the Media Commons scholars have is really to start thinking about new ways of publication that are more open, that give people credit for commenting, that give authors the opportunity to directly engage with their reviewers. So what we're doing is really trying to build tools to help support that. And so we're hoping to be able to start doing more with open annotation, and we hope very soon, in another week or two, to receive a grant that will let us bring a group of scholars to NYU to talk about what peer-to-peer review should be and how it should work and what technologies are needed to support it, because we've learned using Media Commons Press that it's not, there are things we want to be able to do that we can't do yet, so we're hoping to specify what those are. And then really sort of push the envelope in what's accepted as a form of scholarly communication. So is this new everyday kind of in between publishing something that eventually will help people get tenure, get scholarly credibility? The technology work that's coming from this is coming out of DLTS. The editorial director at the Press and I are very much engaged in thinking about how do we promote these events, how do we think about evolving what the Press does as a publisher in relation to this, and even just things like the question of the relationship between the book that the Press is going to publish in print and as an ebook. What's the relationship of that to the book that appeared in Media Commons Press that has been published? It will be a different version. How are we going to describe those two things and relate them to each other? So it's giving us a lot of sort of examples that we have to work through, which is very, very useful. The final example I have is from our colleagues at the Institute for the Study of the Ancient World, which is a very well-endowed research institute at NYU. And they have an extremely ambitious plan to do digital publishing that's in archaeology and classics that's really rich and interlinked and very much takes advantage of the digital, so they can publish materials with many, many, many illustrations and lots of geographic data and links into all kinds of existing databases. But they also wanted, and they can do that with their own resources. They have the technology skills and the subject expertise to create beautiful XML tagged up stuff and present it online. But they realized that they also wanted to have a press imprint, a known publisher's imprint on that. So they came to NYU Press and asked if we could provide that, co-publishing with them. And that, in some of the ways that Charles was discussing, was a real question for the press about how do we share our brand. They were going to be the experts. This was not a field that we publish in, and we didn't feel confident saying, yeah, we can just give our imprint to those works. So we've had to come up with a solution for their doing peer review, us kind of vetting the vetting of their peer review and making sure that we're comfortable, and got a lot of advice from our own faculty advisory board on how to set that up in a way that would allow us to share our imprint really for the first time. The folks that I saw are also going to be working with our colleagues at the Digital Library Technology Services for some of the technology that supports this. And they will additionally be doing a large set of scanned texts that will support a lot of the scholarship. Sort of a huge backlist of material that's important to the studies in the ancient world are going to be scanned and made available through a book reader, a browser reader that our colleagues are working on in DLTS. And that's a good example for me. The book reader that they're building for this purpose can be used for the Arabic materials. It can also be used for the NYU Press backlist, which will eventually, we've scanned all of our backlist books, including some out-of-print books, and we'll be making those available online, not every book, but a significant number of them. So the technology that's coming from the libraries is going to be supporting the press moving into some new ways, and we hope it will be relatively seamless. So this is back to my organizational chart, and I added the cloud at the top because I really have the sense that this is what we're going to be able to do, and the ways we're going to, the decisions we make and the priorities that are driving us are also coming from this kind of overarching set of other people that are NYU's own institutional directions. There are individual faculty members, there are people out there, and in some cases they've, rained funds on us. We don't normally get part of a $3.75 million grant at the press. That was a lot of money for us. We don't get all of it. But that big cloud can produce an enormous amount of potential for us, but it also can bring in challenges and expectations and requirements that we hadn't set up ourselves. So the question of scope mission creep is really critical for us as well. So for me, these are the things that we need to do most effectively next. Really start to articulate the shared visions and goals of all the different partners in this relationship. I'm never going to be able to stop with that. You know, everybody needs to communicate all the time, which is exhausting but important. And then really, I think rather than set up a really concrete set of exactly what we need to be doing, we just need to keep experimenting for a while, and then eventually develop some structures that as we need them. I think the way we've set it up, where I'm this kind of, one of my colleagues calls me the ligature between the press and the library, and to some extent to ITS as well. I mean, ligature is an uncomfortable metaphor for me because I have a feeling a ligature can snap. But it's also, you know, it really is a link. I need to be the one who can bring these conversations together, and I also need to build the relationships that I'm having with the people I'm having conversations with, so that they can converse with each other more. So that's part of the communication, is really building the network of folks in the conversation. So that's the end of my spiel.
Feeling the perils or the benefits of the final speaker. You'll either say, oh, I've heard all this, or what a beautiful summation. So, I think you will hear many echoes of what my colleagues have said here, which is not entirely coincidental. We've spoken together on several other occasions, and I think we benefit from each other's counsel and wisdom and example. As was mentioned earlier, I'm the Associate University Librarian for Publishing at the University of Michigan Library, which is, I think, currently a position unique among research libraries. It's the functional equivalent of an Associate Dean. I'm not sure what your terms are here at Columbia and at Barnard. And I'm responsible for a broad portfolio of publishing and publishing-related services. And I'm here today to talk to you about organization, not just in the sense of our org chart, but in the broad sense of the word, and how we organize our publishing capacity, our skills, and our tools to support the work of the university. And with that in mind, I'd like to step back for a minute and talk a little bit about the work of the university. This is the mission statement from my university: to serve the people of Michigan and the world through preeminence in creating, communicating, preserving, and applying knowledge, art, and academic values, and in developing leaders and citizens who will challenge the present and enrich the future. And I want to focus on what I see as at the core, I mean, it's literally at the center of this, communicating and preserving, because this is where I see the work of libraries and publishers. And I think it's interesting that it is located at the heart of the academic mission. And also that they're integrally tied together. So if this is the work of expressing the scholarly conversation, the great scholarly conversation, it happens across time and space. And that needs to happen through our publishing mechanisms and through our preservation mechanisms, which makes the library a really interesting place to bring together the various publishing components of the university. And I think this is important to consider when we think about the work of the university, that in essence, if we don't communicate our scholarship, we might as well not be doing it. And the academy really needs to look after the expression of its work, or its work is worth nothing. And this need was the motivation for my library and my university to prioritize an investment in publishing. And our goal is to build, in creating a publishing division within the university library, is to build a center for publishing support and a place to think holistic and strategically about publishing and how it helps achieve our institutional goals. I do see this as a necessary direction for research institutions. I think publishing is absolutely integral to the academic enterprise, but we often tend not to think strategically about it. And while we've invested very heavily in the services and the infrastructure to support the actual research and the production of the scholarship, when it comes to the publication of the scholarship, we often think the market will take care of it. And in many areas, the market fails us for a lot of different reasons in communicating scholarship. So let me talk about one sense of organization, which is the institutional reporting relationships through which we manage our staff and their work. So in the beginning, well, really about 2 years ago, there were sort of several centers of publishing and publishing-related activity going on at the university. They were scattered around the campus, but they were increasingly concentrated in the library, however, without any real coordination. The unit which I was the director of formerly, the Scholarly Publishing Office, reported to the Dean of Libraries. And almost through happenstance, one of our other sort of content creation units, the Text Creation Partnership, reported to me but was not related to the Scholarly Publishing Office. Our institutional repository, Deep Blue, reported to our AUL for Library Information Technology, and the University of Michigan Press reported to the Dean of the Graduate School. In July of 2009, the University of Michigan moved the press from the oversight of the graduate school to within the library, and Charles talked about that move some a little bit. And this created an occasion for discussion of how we best managed the library's approach to publishing. So when I came into the position, I was handed, as new managers are, an org chart. And this brought together several of these units into one publishing portfolio. And so here's what it looked like, and it's quite tidy. And each of the units is within its own box. And this is very much how they operated. They were occupied with their own projects. They were friendly, occasionally collaborative, occasionally competitive, but essentially self-contained. And my mission has been to mess that all up and to break open the boundaries that contain those various kinds of publishing activity. So what I've been interested in is creating a central organization that supports a variety of kinds of publishing, and in which there's a great deal of interchange and overlap. So, oh, my daisy isn't displaying nicely here. It's really quite beautiful. The colors are very nice. But so what I'm interested in is really what happens at the core. And we still have a lot of investment in what I call the petals, the things that are on the outside. But I see these as need and demand driven, and we're able to grow new petals in response to new needs, or as much as my staff hates it when I say it, we're able to pluck off old ones when they're no longer necessarily, or maybe they wither and drop as they're no longer necessary. But at the heart of this, we have this core of expertise and attention to the publishing needs of the university. So what is M-Publishing? It's a suite of imprints and services dedicated to publishing and preserving the scholarly record. And as I said, it's the location and organization of a variety of publishing mechanisms that serve the needs of the institution and the academy, and I think of that as the academy with a capital A, not just my institution, but the scholarly academy. Cliff Lynch, the director of the Coalition for Networks Information, recently described this as, not M-Publishing, but what he saw as a need for publishing in the university in the future as a portfolio of strategies to support the communication and documentation of scholarship. And what we're trying to achieve within that center is essentially building services and infrastructure to support publishing, to develop a program of education and advocacy around publishing and publishing-related issues at the local and national level, and to actually publish, and that is certainly last but not least, that we believe that we need to invest in this production and dissemination of scholarship in ways that we can find sustainable and supportable. So that sounds pretty good. But I'd like to stop to consider what is this publishing of which I speak exactly? So I'd like to turn to that question for a while and briefly interrogate our notions of what constitutes publishing. Because I think that what happens in our institutional and organizational discussions around publishing is that we often come to them with an inherited and unselfconscious idea of publishing, but they may be quite different depending on who's at the table. And that creates stress points in our discussions. I'll let you contemplate this for a minute. I should have Charles say publishing, and then I can say it so we can see what these pronunciations actually sound like. Right? But you can see that even you never let somebody have access to the OED, right? That there's a range of dictionary definitions of publishing, from the very simple to make public, to creating. And I like the fact that it's become through the medium of the print or internet and the OED, to make generally accessible or available for acceptance or use, to present to or before the public. But there's a bundle of activities that support publishing. And I think there's a kind of range or spectrum from one part of simply putting something on the web is an act of publication to a very complex set of interrelated activities that result in publication. And I think if you talk to most people who have worked in the publishing industry, they'll say that it's a whole range of activities that are linked, and necessarily so. That's the way in which our business structures have grown up to support all of these, that range from the acquisition of the content through a selection and solicitation process, through all the steps most of you are familiar with, going through review, editorial development, editing and proofreading, actually getting the material into shape, marketing and promoting it, having the mechanisms to sell it if necessary, and then to actually deliver it to the user. But what I would posit is that publishing is actually a bundle of activities that can be combined, separated, and recombined in many configurations. And I think Monica and Charles have pointed to some of the ways in which that can be done. That they can be outsourced or done in-house. And they can be done independently through a single author or creator. They can be done through a set of coordinated services, or they can be done through a single multifunctional organization. And that's okay. But that what we need to do is to think about how we meet, whether we need to do all of those things, in what cases we need to do those things, and then how we meet the needs. So put more simply, I think what it is up to us. So I think those of us who are in the position of creating new kinds of publishing mechanisms and in taking advantage of what technology and networks in communication has to offer us in terms of assisting with publishing, need to ask ourselves some questions. And I think if we work with that list I put up before, again, we say, do these things need to be done? In some cases, maybe yes, every single one of these steps needs to be done in order to meet the communication needs, the scholarly communication needs of that particular genre. Who will do it? How do we, what staff do we direct toward this? What parts of the organization? And we have to ask how we'll support this activity. And there are a variety of ways in which we can do that, either through directing existing resources, looking for new resources, or through some kind of cost recovery, or through sales of resulting products. Again, I don't think that any one of these answers is privileged, but that it's more a matter of assessing the need and figuring out how to meet it. So I just want to give one example today, which is our University of Michigan faculty reprints. This is a new service that is not all that high impact yet, we hoped, and it's not yet broadly used, but it's been much appreciated. So with the faculty reprint service, we make available to faculty whose works have gone out of print at other places, we put them online and back into print for them. In most cases, when this has happened, the faculty member has already reclaimed the rights, but we can also assist them in investigating the rights situation and helping to reclaim those rights if they need to. This is just a little bit of, it comes from our handout that we give to faculty who are interested, that talks about how we get it started. This is one of the reprints in the HathiTrust. We put them, talk about this more in a moment. We put them online both in the HathiTrust, our digital library, and in our institutional repository. So I'd like to go back to that list of components of publishing that I put up before and just talk about the faculty reprint service in that light. So how do we get these books? Well, we set up a selection principle, which is pretty simple. You're a faculty member of the University of Michigan and you have a previously published book to which you own the rights. We don't believe that we have a need for review, editorial development, or editing and proofreading, since those have been done with the original text. Much of the design is in the existing book, but because we do allow for some extra material, the authors often write a new introduction or may provide some supplemental materials, and we need to design covers. We worked on templates to create those to minimize the cost, and those were supplied by M Publishing. The actual production is managed by M Publishing. The marketing and promotion of these reprints is a kind of effort where everybody brings to the table what we can. The author usually does some work in that in his or herself, and publishing makes an effort to make announcements about the book, let the campus community know, let the department, if we work with the author to target listservs, blogs, places where people want to know this book is available again and make contact about that. And we also poll in our subject librarians in the area of the subject area of the reprint and ask them to tap their library networks and their scholarly networks just to let people know this book is available again. The sales are handled pretty simply. The only place they're for sale is Amazon and direct through us. Although we are in discussions about how the University of Michigan Press can provide distribution services for the faculty reprints as well. In terms of fulfillment, again, through Amazon, also through our espresso book machine at the library, we'll produce local copies, which has been useful in printing up books for classes, for example, at a reasonable price. And again, potentially we could do this through the press. Online, they're available through Deep Blue and HathiTrust. And there it is on Amazon. And in addition to the services that I've mentioned, we also provide a network of support for the reprints. We do contractual review and termination assistance provided by the Copyright Office. If the author needs help in seeking permissions on embedded materials, we give them guidance on that. We don't actually do the permission seeking ourselves, but we provide them with templates and we help them to locate the rights holder if we can do that. And digitization services to get a digital copy of the book if they don't have an electronic copy, and even source copies, because in one case, even the author did not have a copy of her book, are provided by the library. But my point in this is that each one of these pieces is a relatively small contribution from an area of the library. And I think what's interesting is the way in which we've been able to combine them to create a new kind of service. It's not a perfect way to work, and I don't want to indicate that it is. And with each new service that we're trying to provide, there's a substantial effort that goes into defining, shaping, and communicating about that service. And because we are drawing upon many locations of work throughout the library, the coordination cost can be high. And it's also hard sometimes to tell the difference between when we're doing something just as a one-off and when it's the first of its kind. And that was certainly true with the faculty reprint series that I put up here. There was one person who came to us and said, "Can you help me do this?" And it seemed like a good thing to do. And we defined what we wanted to do and said, you know, we should really offer this more broadly. And so far it looks like there will be some uptake on this. We've got 6 books after 6 months that we've put back, and it's not been broadly advertised yet, and we have several more expressions of interest. But that was a chance that we took about whether there would be an appetite for this or not. It also can be challenging to balance a service orientation and meeting the immediate needs of people who come to us with a publishing problem or a need for publishing capacity, and being proactive in our programmatic development and deciding internally, well, where do we think things are going, and how can we take the time to shape a proper service? And also in doing this kind of coordinated configuration of parts to support publishing, sometimes a product or publication doesn't have a particular champion. We're handing it off from one piece to another, and nobody's looking after it through the whole scope from the moment we begin to talk about the project to when it appears online and in print. And this form of organization can complicate that, and it's something we're trying to address in sort of assigning advocates, managers to every kind of publication, making sure that that's happening, but that's an additional demand on our people. So I wanted to leave you with this, which has nothing at all to do with publishing, but it's up on the wall of my office. I was from a company called Indie Furniture. I was looking for a storage solution for my 5-year-old's room, and they have furniture that comes in that shelving that comes in components, and you can put it together in all kinds of interesting ways. And I love that what they have online to plan your furniture is called the configurator, because I often think of the work that we're doing as being a kind of new configuration to support scholarly publishing. We have a lot of pieces. And we're trying to work in collaboration and helping to do planning, and in sometimes helping people to do themselves what we can't do for them by providing referrals and consultation, and resulting in, my favorite part of this, a highly reconfigurable structure to support publishing. So thanks.
So are there any questions for the panel? And if you have one, could you go up to the microphone? And if not, they're going to hear from me. Okay. Then hopefully this will prompt some people. But so all of you are working, trying to pull together communication, as you all suggested. But you're all working on a variety of projects. So how are those, how do you sort those out? Like you bring all the people to the table. I mean, just walk us through kind of your process for the decision-making for which projects you take on and who gets to make what call. And it's kind of a vaguely worded question intentionally for you.
Well, I think one of the interesting questions here is the role of the faculty member, and the point that Maria made about is this a one-off or is this the start of a service? I mean, you know, there's this this term that's used around the University of charismatic megafauna, which I like because it expresses a certain type of faculty member who's willing to push the envelope. So, you know, in decision-making around projects and doing new types of things, it's crucial to us that we're working with content providers and intellectual champions who are easy to work with and who have good ideas. And that's not a very scientific way of making decisions between projects, but I think it's a really good one. And I remember a project which was it was a big archaeology project that I was on the fringes of at one stage, and their policy, their secret for success was KTAO, and they put it up on the PowerPoint presentation. And you know, I said, "What is KTAO?" And they said, "It's kick the arseholes out." So
That question is, I think, central to what I've been experiencing moving from the publishing world to the library world, where in publishing, an enormous amount of the energy of any publishing organization is spent precisely on deciding what you're going to publish. And you have a very, very clearly, in a good publishing house, a clearly articulated sense of what it is that you do and what it is that you don't do. And then when you decide you're going to do it, what happens after that. The whole thing is clear and well-defined and on some level rigid, which is why people have been struggling working with a lot of university presses who have rigid structures because they know how much they cost and how long it takes. And that whole process was very, very comfortable and familiar to me, that we knew what to do and how to do it, and we knew what we didn't do. And in library publishing and in digital technology projects in general, it's very much harder. At NYU, what we tend to do is, you know, if someone's really advocating for something, you know, we don't have a really formal structure yet, as you could probably tell from my slide with all those different arrows. There isn't a hierarchy yet, and one of the things I think I need to work on is getting a hierarchy in place so we can start to really assess this big stream of work versus this, and how are we going to bring it together. We have a lot of the charismatic megafauna issue. People come in the door with funding or with reputation or with something super cool, and you know, energy gets directed that way. But when I first started talking to them about this job, I remember I said to Steve Mykowski, who's the director of the press, so how do you think that dual report's going to work? I'll report to you and I'll report to Carol. And he said, yeah, and I also report to Carol, so if there's a really big disagreement, Carol wins. And in some way I found that comforting. A, that there were going to be disagreements, and B, that there was going to be, you know, somebody who's going to make the call. So we're still sort of in that, and we don't have a lot of fights, but eventually the hierarchy does sort of take over, and that's, you know, useful to know.
Yeah, I guess I've been thinking about that hierarchy a bit too, and what the creation of my position did that we didn't have before, because these units did exist before, and spent a lot of time over the course of many years, like trying to figure out how do we work together, or how can we, and always sort of agreeing that they shared a sense of wanting to advance the scholarly mission and contribute to that. So there is some value in, now we have my managers meetings, and we all sit down every 2 weeks and talk through these things, and at some point I say, okay, this. So that's one way. We are putting in place some other structures, but the projects that arise sort of out of the campus or external organizations that want to work with us, we have an application process in place that has a number of criteria, partly to help us assess their readiness to work with us. How much have they thought about this? That also looks at funding and fit with mission. And so that gets reviewed a couple of times a year. But I don't want to pretend that things don't trump that. And the things that probably trump it are a really powerful faculty member who may have a funding source, who comes in and says, I'm on fire and let's do this thing, and usually talks to my boss, the Dean of Libraries, and says, this is great, how can we support this? And then we figure out how to do that. And the other thing, because we do continue to need to fund a lot of our activities, is if there are things with significant revenue opportunities that sort of might get in the mix in a different kind of way. So no perfect answer.
I'm really interested in talking about the sustainability, and especially for academic publishing. And we know this is not profitable, but how you help the publisher? I have a recent case. One of my librarians working with another librarian find some rare resources in our collection they want to publish by the Columbia University Press. However, Columbia University Press asking contribution. We need to find money ourselves. In the librarian, we don't have money. And so my librarian spent a lot of time talking to each faculty. Is there any way, you think it's more, the financial way to sustain, to help for the academic publishing? I mean, to me, I was like a little bit shocked that my librarian is looking around everywhere looking for money because the Columbia Press asking for $7,000 to publish a book. It's like, wow.
If you guys had an answer to that.
Yeah.
Well, I
If
actually,
only.
I have an answer because I'm directly responding. If you could go to yes, but it comes from what you, can't remember your name,
Maria.
said that that in the past, the universities and faculty would work on creating the scholarship, doing the research, and then the market would take care of the situation. It would get out there, it would be disseminated because there was a market for it. And now for certain quite narrow projects where we only can expect to sell about 200 copies, the market doesn't take care of it anymore. And that's why these collaborations could, are I think mushrooming and are great if you can take out the, if you can get the funding in some other way and take out the market as part of your thinking about getting the scholarship out there. That's the only way they're going to work, and they're only going to come from this kind of, I think, collaboration where the economic model is just not the way it was in the old days when we could sell enough books to cover the costs.
Go ahead.
So I can interrupt you.
Well, I guess I've had a three-pronged strategy, and it's ongoing work, believe me, on this, is that I think that publishing doesn't have to cost us as much as it has cost us. And that we have an opportunity to constrain those costs, and that technology is useful in that. And so that it's incumbent upon the people who are doing the publishing to look for ways to constrain the cost. But that it's also incumbent on the institution to recognize that it does cost money. And I think one of the things libraries have been grappling with as those, what was the percent, 70-something% of libraries that have started to engage in publishing, is that it means dedicating resources, and it's usually something more than just hiring a person to do some programmatic development. That they do have to shift resources toward that, and so libraries have to think about that. And then the third part is that the institution has to think about its responsibility to support the cost of publishing, and those of us who are doing it need to make a better case to the institution about why that's true, and to keep having those conversations. So that, for me, that's the kind of long-term answers. Like, we work on all three parts of that, and then we might get to a healthier, more sustainable publishing environment.
So, just one point on that. Something that's really struck me moving, as I did in 2009, from a small private non-profit publisher to a large research institution, is that there's an awful lot of money that's poorly spent within large universities around the issues of communicating scholarship. And communicating scholarship, but also communicating other things which are maybe less scholarly. And strategically, if the library can position itself as an organization that knows how to do things within workflows and get the stuff out there and measure impact and measure usage and that sort of thing, which is not hard, it's not too hard to do because the library does have a lot of those skills in it, then there's actually quite a lot of money washing around. There are quite a lot of resources which just can be better harnessed. So that's really struck me.
I also was really struck moving from the publishing world into the library world with that money that's washing around. I mean, in a normal publishing house, you know exactly what you're spending. And with innovative kind of new projects in the digital realm, it's very, very, very hard for libraries to understand what they actually cost. So when I hear people say things like, well, we've got all these online journals using, you know, open source software and it's all free, I want to throttle them because it isn't free. It's costing money in an enormous number of unaccountable ways that haven't had to be documented yet. And publishers who are working within a very explicit budget constraint are really required to document everything they spend and everything they bring in. So university presses can often seem rigid because they can say, we need $7,000. They know exactly what they need. And libraries very often can't say that. I mean, they may be able to say it for certain kinds of things, but I think part of that sustainability conversation has to be a willingness to really assess what the actual costs are and what it's going to take to keep that going, which is in some ways what Maria's trying to work out.
I can repeat the question. So the question was, how does the espresso book machine fit into the equation? Are you all familiar with this machine? So it's a book-making machine, right? So that prints books on demand. You have to have a digital file. Once the digital file is set up, it takes about 5 minutes to produce the one-off of a book, and does it pretty cheaply. Direct costs are about a penny a page, including the cover. And then there are, of course, there are operator costs and things like that associated with it. But we sell these books that we produce between $6 and $10 when we sell them in the library. And I think for me, it's just, it's a piece of the toolkit. All right, so it meets the need for local printing. Some of the ways in which we've used it that have been interesting to me are a professor who's authoring a textbook and working it out with his students. So now we're on his third iteration of the textbook. He adjusts it every semester, and then we turn around and produce a new very short run and sell it directly to the students from the library as he works toward the final version of it. Ability to put some older works back into print to support education. So I think there are services that do what the espresso book machine does. I mean, there's Lulu and Blurb and any number of print-on-demand services. But by putting it in the library and connecting it with people who help think about the publishing strategy for a particular book, it becomes a pretty valuable tool.
Can I just make comments? Yes, I understand that the publishing, you need to estimate, cost. But also I'm thinking we can work in library, we can work with publishing, the press. Like for this book, I know the project you mentioned. And we know there's a big market outside US, in China. And we can introduce you the publishers, vendors in China, Hong Kong, and they can maybe sell your books. They cut the cost. That's the possibility, because we can meet the Chinese publisher, invite like 10 biggest East Asian library director to China, free, trip to talk to the Chinese publishers. And anything published about China in US, especially material they have not seen. They are really interested to, whatever, to work with that. So I'm willing to working with I enjoy this model, the library and the press working together. I really enjoy that. Yeah.
And I'm going to encourage Jim and Jennifer to have a conversation. So anybody else? Well, thank you very much, panel, and thanks to everyone for coming. And our next event is on the 6th of April, right here in this very room, and I hope you all come back. Thanks.